Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this session on future technologies, with thanks to Elemental for hosting this panel. A really interesting and varied panel for you today. I'm going to introduce everyone in a moment, but just to say, my name is Jeremy Yapp. I'm the Head of Flexible Energy Systems for BEAMA. BEAMA is the trade association in the UK for electrotechnical manufacturers and service providers, and we represent the energy supply chain. My quarter of BEAMA is the most interesting part. I do flexible energy systems, so mostly behind the meter flexibility. In particular, I run a group on connected homes and smart buildings. So to discuss future tech today, we have Rebecca Lane from Energy Systems Catapult, Chris Jones from HomeLINK, Sam Collier from Bristol University, and Simon Ayers, the CEO of TrustMark. So thank you, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to pass to you each in turn and ask you to tell us a little bit or a lot about yourselves and something about what you're working on now and your focus on home technologies and how those are being prepared for the future. So to you first, Rebecca, from the Catapult. Welcome.
Thank you. As I said, I'm from Energy Systems Catapult, and our focus is driving innovation in the UK to help reach our net zero goals. I'm the business model innovation team, a consultant in that team, and the kind of thing we're doing to help meet those goals is to help develop new business models, new service propositions, to deliver the kind of products and services that we need to help meet those net zero goals. So it's very pertinent to the discussion today, because obviously there's a lot of new products and services that are being developed at the moment. But our approach to business model innovation is we're not necessarily just looking at the commercials, it's understanding the route to market, the fit with the customer type, and trying to understand the context for how to deliver that service and proposition. So who do we normally work with? We work a lot with innovators in this space through the Catapult's Accelerator Programme, Energy Launchpad. So that tends to be with SMEs who've got new ideas and how to meet these challenges. And we help them with market information and assessing their proposition to help them meet to market. And we did a big programme in the Heating and Cooling Challenge, which particularly resonates with the technology today, where they were looking at new heating technologies and how to decarbonise heating. We also undertake a number of research projects as well to look at changes in the market and what's going on in that area. We work directly with businesses to understand new products and services that they can develop and help inform their roadmap and how they can go forward. And finally, we also work on large programs as well to help with the business model development for those particular areas. So one in particular that's relevant to this webinar is the Active Building Centre, and one of my colleagues is helping with the business model development element there. I thought I would just say very quickly before handing on some of the things that we found from our research in this sector that are the challenges. And I think from my feeling, and I think maybe some of the guys might disagree with me about the technology, but it feels like a lot of the technology is there. Some of it in its infancy, but the problem is the solution actually meeting the needs of the customer is not necessarily there at the moment. It's building that together so people can access those products easily. The second thing that I think is really important, hopefully we'll discuss this a little bit later, is about the business case for these technologies. So it's there, we can buy it, but why should we buy it? Does it work financially to do that? And if we kind of looking at the different housing tenures, for social housing, that business case needs to fit in with their wider house investment programme for retrofit. If we're looking at smarter home technologies, should you just start with the fabric first approach or looking at kind of other smart technologies to decarbonise the homes? That's a difficult decision to make, particularly when you're looking at all the other decisions they have to put way up against as well, like new roofing or new kitchens and so on as well. So there's a wider context to take this into account with. For new build as well, we can debate building regulations. It's probably not the forum today, but to drive in these new smart technologies, who's benefiting from that? Ultimately, it's the person who buys the home. And for some of the feedback we've had is there really a strong enough consumer pull to put these smart technologies in the home? Are people really looking for that at the moment? And then when we're looking at kind of owner occupiers and people independently making those decisions for new smart technologies, When you're looking to buy a house, it might not be the first decision that you decide to go for to retrofit your home or install smart technologies. Again, it's the context of other things that you're trying to add in. So what's the business case for individual consumers to pop that in? And kind of what I would summarize is there doesn't seem to be a sustainable market for these things to drive people to make those investments in smart technology, whether that's retrofit technology or kind of apps and ways of linking different devices within the home. And I'm sure Simon will cover this a little bit later as well. Obviously, we've got a bit of a boost at the moment with the Green Homes Grant, but how can we sustain that into the future and going on through the 2020s? Some of the things we're doing to help address this problem, particularly with regards to finance and the business cases. I mentioned Active Building Centre. So this is a programme that's being run by Specific. It's a spin out from there in Cardiff University. And the area we're looking at is how to get these technologies in to new build. So it's specifically focusing on that area. And a lot of the work is looking at new business models to make that work. And on the social housing side, we're undertaking a project with Places for People at the moment with the Energy Systems Catapult called Dreams. And again, that's looking at new financial instruments or business models to kind of promote this smart technology and retrofit into their building stock. That's a lot of information. It seems like the technology is there, we need to get the investment into it. And I think that is also reflected by the number of initiatives that have popped up over the last 12 months as well, that are focusing on trying to find new finance mechanisms to get retrofit underway as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think we're going to come on to some questions of scalability and finance and sustaining the pace later. I think that's something that we as a panel need to explore. Chris Jones from HomeLINK, all yours. Welcome.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of points there I'd love to jump into the conversation about already. So I think it'll be a good conversation. But I'll refrain from doing that and give a quick intro to who I am and what HomeLINK's about, and then some key things that in regards to future technologies. So I'm Chris. I'm one of the co-founders of HomeLINK and the Chief Operating Officer. My role really spans everything that's non-technical, I'd say. What we're effectively doing is integrating a broad approach of IoT technologies into social housing. Obviously, some technologies are more advanced and more sort of ready to scale than others. The areas which we're seeing a big uptake of are more around the environmental air quality monitoring and some aspects of that which relate to heating efficiency and air quality and things like that, and mold. And really, we're helping landlords tackle quite a range of different issues, from energy efficiency to fire safety. Improving and optimizing maintenance, helping them be more preventative, more proactive, improving the investment efficiency. So, on one hand, it's important to know the effectiveness of retrofit, by modeling live data from the property, and that's something that's been done before and something that we do. But it's also important to understand, what the implications are for those kind of technologies with regards to improving or worsening air quality, which is something that needs to be, in my view, considered in parallel. Otherwise, you might end up having to go back and rework things that have been done. And we essentially provide, from these different sensors, a number of different insights and recommendations specific to the landlord. I think we're at a point in the market now where it's starting to scale more broadly. There've been a lot of smaller projects and pilots that have been government funded over the last few years with various companies like us and some of our other sort of competitive companies in the market. But recently we're starting to see some fairly significant contracts and scale. I think there are still some challenges around meeting the specific needs, and I think related to process innovation, which Rebecca was talking about, and also how you create a business case for something which is quite broad ranging and touches on a lot of different areas within a landlord. In terms of how I think things will play, we totally focus on social housing technologies, but my view of the future home, whether it's social housing or not, I think we're going to see a really big growth of smart home technologies, IT is becoming a bit of a hot topic. If you look at companies that are becoming more, private equity and investors are more interested in IT's growing a lot more due to a lot of the innovation around sensors, making them more cost effective and more reliable, and longer battery lives and battery life technology and things like that. I think a lot of this growth, we're moving away from things that are seemingly more novel, like curtains that you can use an app to open and things like that, to things which the sort of the sort of average person who might not be just super interested in cool techie things.
Lost Chris, so we'll come back to him in a moment. Now, one of the projects that Chris was talking about is some work that they've been doing, I think, with Bristol University. So we're very fortunate to have Sam Collier here with us as well. Sam, do you want to take the floor? And with luck, Chris will be back with us shortly.
Sorry, I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Where did I leave off? Future home technologies.
Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about. Should we pick up on those points again? Let me move on to Sam now, as he's just about to go into full flow. And
yeah.
Chris, sorry, we lost you. Sam.
Yes, thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my work with HomeLINK is looking at the ethical side of the implementation of IoT in social homes. As you mentioned, I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Bristol, and my research looks at the acceptability of technologies for sustainability. Specifically, my PhD looks at the uptake of solar PV in the city of Bristol, in the context of their zero carbon goal by 2030. Bristol has something like 1 in 50 of their homes have solar PV on them, and recent work suggests that this needs to be something like 1 in 2 homes to meet their generation targets within the city limits. So there's kind of a need to really accelerate the uptake of technologies like solar. As we're talking about here, there's lots of different policy changes and investment coming in, but my work focuses more on the kind of people side of things, so looking at the socioeconomic factors that influence uptake and acceptability. And also some more of the kind of behavioral changes, so looking at different motivations, the kind of capacity of people to be involved in the transition, looking at kind of like knowledge and experience, and also the kind of physical capability to do it. And also kind of looking at different other aspects like trust in the actors that are involved, perceptions that change across different geographies, across different facets of society, looking at different like age groups, ethnicity. So there's lots of factors that influence people's propensity to get involved in these kind of innovative technologies at home. And I think, during the pandemic, home has, the kind of concept of the home has changed quite a lot as well. And we'll be spending a lot more time at home, so people have become more tied to what it means to be at home. So I think to some extent there's been an increase in awareness of the issues that we're kind of discussing today. In terms of my work with HomeLINK, we've been talking to social residents and other organisations that work in the social housing sector, landlords, kind of think tanks and kind of umbrella organisations to understand what acceptance of IoT looks like and the ethical issues that go alongside it. At the moment, we're carrying out surveys. We've engaged over 500 social residents, and we've got some really interesting insights, which I touched on earlier in the presentation. And basically, I mean, if we're looking forward, data is going to be a really important part of the transition. And Chris mentioned earlier, you know, the increase in IoT technologies will enrich the data that we have about our homes. But, you know, both in social homes and in other tenures, the data that we use is going to have implications, and you know, we need to think about the privacy aspects of this. I think, you know, kind of bias within the technologies has become more visible in the public space, looking at kind of the exams issues that the government had with, you know, designating the grades using algorithms. So people are much more aware of the issues that go hand in hand with these technologies, and I think social housing is a kind of a focal point for this, because there's different power issues in terms of, you know, who decides who installs these technologies, and I think it goes into other tenures like private renting. But so we're just asking some really interesting questions and understanding how different groups are perceiving these issues, and what we can do to improve acceptance of these technologies and ultimately get people's buy-in to lead to, you know, more of these technologies being installed in our homes.
So many thanks, Sam. So to be talking about the role of data enriching our understanding of our homes, and also to be touching on installation questions surrounding that, what better time to be able to introduce Simon Ayers from TrustMark. So thanks for joining us, Simon.
Thanks, Jeremy. I guess really on the state of the nation sort of discussion amongst all these technology areas, the reality being that we are at a point in time where we have to look at retrofit, we have to look at net zero, all those lovely comments and generic things that we talk around these days. But in reality, we have 28.3 million homes to retrofit by 2030. Lots of initiatives, maybe some disparate, maybe some not connected as well as they should be. But if you put that into context, I think it's currently 6.2 million in the private rental sector. There are 3.8 million in social housing, you know, and you've got a high number of able to pay markets to also cater for. And it's how we do this. How do we sort of almost work with industrialization, you know, from the complete design of a wrap for a house through to that individual retrofit process that will engage with the trades. So I think there's a massive piece that has to come into play here. And I also think, though, that we have to start thinking probably more holistically about the opportunities that we have in our sector. For a number of years, we probably haven't trained people to the degree we need to. So therefore, we do have skill shortages. You know, it's great and people can say we can do all these things, but actually, even with smart homes, you know, you have to have people that are trained to engage, to understand, and people that can manage the technology. One of our directors at TrustMark has a smart home and struggles to find a technician to come and manage all the different aspects of it. So we've got to think differently as we bring technology into play. And it's very much not just the introduction of the technology, but it's actually about how we bring that engagement to the consumer, how we bring that to the business, and how we grow this together, because it's a mammoth task. TrustMark is the government endorsed quality scheme, as I'm sure you're all aware. And we have something called PAS 2030-2035. So PAS 2035, which is the whole house approach, will come fully into play at the end of June in 2021. And that has some interesting areas that brings technology into play. So if you think about the assessment of a property, you know, traditionally we all think of somebody turning up, knocking on the door, and then going around all the different rooms and doing all the different measurements. You know, thinking of the future, we have to be at a point where we have data, you know, we have algorithms, we have machine learning, we have all those things that bring together very valid, very rich data to help us actually assess a property. But also with the inputs of things like smart meters, you know, with the technology now to sense usage within a house, we probably should be looking at, how we also help a consumer manage that property in a more effective way. And I'm guessing, Rebecca, Chris and Sam are looking at all those different technologies. And there are lots there that are coming through, and we've got to start to use them. The designing that comes within the standard as well really should be looking at the data. It should be looking at everything we have. How do we move forward? What new technology? We talk about things like internal wall insulation. So if you think traditionally, 50 millimeters thick, you lose a big percentage of your room. You now have insulation that is down to single millimeters in thickness. So there are moves in the industry to improve not just the delivery and the technology, but actually the consumer perception. And that's another area that we've got to pick up. But one of the very important things about all of this is we have to get a consumer to spend fairly large sums of money on their property to retrofit it over this period of years. And actually, I want some sort of verification that all this investment that I've made into my property is actually going to pay back that investment. So the verification has to come, and that has to come through technology. That has to come through being able to measure and return those rewards to me. And the more we can do that, the more you will get people to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the greater the drive will come. So there's some great opportunities, some really fantastic stuff coming up. And it's probably worth also just talking a little about these opportunities. So TrustMark is the regulatory requirement within the energy company obligation. If you are involved in that sector, which is obviously Eco3 running through to at the end of March 22, you have to be registered with TrustMark, but you also have to lodge all the work into the TrustMark data warehouse. And the data warehouse is now a central repository that collects all the data on the energy efficiency measures being installed under that government initiative. We'll see Eco4, I believe, move to a mixed measure, and that will run through for a number of years, but Eco has been confirmed through to the end of 26. So actually, you've now got some sort of longevity and sustainability being built into an energy company obligation, but I think technology will start to have a part to play in that. We currently have the Green Homes Grant. Interestingly, a number of businesses that meet the standard have been operating and are now absolutely flat out with work. In a lot of cases, they have now order books through to the end of March. And I think it's about £400 million worth of work has already been booked. So there are some challenges around getting people to do the work. There are some challenges to get quotes. We're looking at how we build the supply chain, and you have all the joys that come with, supply chain capability and also with Brexit. But those initiatives, whilst they may be reasonably short term, are creating a transition. They're creating a drive that will move forward. The extension to the Green Home Grant Scheme through to 22, so that goes through now till the end of March 22, does mean that we're seeing a £320 million almost buffer put into place from March next year to March the following year. So we now have Eco and we have the Green Home Grant Scheme. But we mustn't forget there's also the Local Authority Delivery Scheme running at the same time. I think, and I'm sure people will correct me here, but I think it's around 74 million running through to the end of March 21. From the end of this year, we have two schemes. There's a scheme called LAD 1B and another scheme called LAD 2. They are £426 million in value and are looking to how they will treat social housing, requirement for TrustMark, some slightly different rules, but again, all work has to be lodged into the data warehouse. So we are starting to build a data set around the measures being installed into property, and that would include all of the measures in the low carbon areas. So we start to create a picture. But then you build in thinking, so actually this all sounds really good. What happens at the end of next year? Well, you have the home upgrade grant. Likely that's still in plan. It's another 2.5 billion government investment, and it will run through till 2025. So you are now talking about bringing E, F and G properties to a higher EPC rating, whether you love or loathe the EPCs, of course, because we all have our own views on those. But there is nothing else. We've got to start somewhere. But if you put that together with some of the other consultations, so we've not talked about social housing decarbonisation, a 6 billion fund over a 10-year period, the private rental sector, so they are looking at probably regulation being laid at the back end of 2021, and you are looking at 3 million odd homes that will have to, 3.2 million homes I think is the exact, to become EPCC by 2025 under new tenancies. Bolt on also, improving home energy performance through lenders. So let's not forget, there's now a consultation that is out with all the large finance houses to say, how can we put technology, how can we put energy efficiency measures into your lending when you are getting a mortgage, when you are buying a house, to improve that property? And there is every chance that will happen. And we do quite a lot of work with the Green Finance Institute. So we're already plugged in and hearing about how mortgages might be linked to energy usage. So that needs technology, it needs support, it needs data. So actually, this is the most sort of opportune and fantastic time to be in the sector, because we really do have just this prime ability now to drive the future. And I think I've probably spoken too much anyway, but that's fine. I'm happy for questions as always, Jeremy.
Simon, thank you. That is fantastic. Now, if anyone wants to put some questions either in the Q&A or chat, we will pick them up. I didn't want to mention that at the beginning of the session because I thought it was just nice for everyone on the panel just to present from where they are now. But if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and I'll try to pick them up. There's a lot to come back on here. I'm particularly interested, Simon, in what you've just been talking about skills shortage. But in order for you to catch your breath, I'm actually going to ask Rebecca to come back either on that or just perhaps from your perspective, looking at these things, as we say, holistically. You've been talking about, for example, the heating and cooling challenge, which is new tech to decarbonize heating. And you've said the technology is roughly there or thereabouts, and actually that's BEAMA's position as well, but it lacks consumer access, it lacks scalability and so on. How do you think we as an industry can resolve or address some of those issues?
So I suppose looking at the heating side of things, and there's a lot of research, and I suppose we're talking about the home, and that's quite broad. So I'm going to just hone in on one element of it just to keep it specific. But looking at heating today, majority of people in the UK have a gas boiler, and when that breaks down, they contact their plumber, or they contact, maybe if you're lucky, the original manufacturer, and they'll get a replacement for that existing gas boiler. And I think that point of trying to explain other technologies, it's not even smart at that point in terms of a heat service or a smart heating system, is trying to get into that point where the decision is made to influence people's decision and to transition to something that's different. And whether that's kind of making a decision around how to upgrade your home to something else or a distress decision for the boiler, it's not easy at the moment to assess what's available and make a good informed decision. And I think that's where these innovators at the moment, and it's what we talk about quite a lot in terms of the service flow and the service design, is to understand when your customer comes in, that front end of describing the proposition to the customer, how can you make it as simple as possible for them to understand how it's going to affect them, affect their experience, affect their home, and also on the bottom line, how much it's going to cost them, and what the implication of that, and Simon picked up on that earlier, is kind of the verification of the payback side of things. For a lot of people, and I'm talking specifically on the owner-occupier, it's the biggest asset investment you'll ever make. And when we're talking some of these kind of retrofit investments, could be £20,000. I think when the Remorban project, I think they managed to get to EPCB, it was about £50,000 on a property. It's ginormous amounts of money. And I think the space that really needs improvement is that front end explanation of giving people trust and confidence in what you're trying to sell them and how it will benefit them, to be very clear on that. And then again, as Simon's picked up on there as well, is the support after it's installed, and the trust and confidence that what changes are made, whether that's insulating your home, changing your heating system, even installing smart tech, as Simon picked up, it's that you will have that support afterwards to help you if there are any issues. So I think to summarize, it's having very clear, slick service design from the front end all the way through to the support to make sure people, and this is with individual consumers, I'll add, and not necessarily talking about the social housing side of things, to give people the confidence. But that's most of the houses in the UK as well, if we're really going after that millions of homes that we need to get to.
So my dream is to have someone come over this weekend and say, Mr. Yapp, look at your house. For 1,000 or 2,000 or 5 or 10 or 20, here is what you could do. And here are the likely outcomes of that expenditure. And here are the payback times. Yeah. And I think, Sam and Chris, I want to bring you both in on this point on consumer visibility and willingness to change. We can talk about the individual price of heat pumps another time. I don't necessarily want to do that now. But in your research, Sam, and in your experiences, Chris, you must have a view on this.
Yeah, I think when it comes to heating, especially, there is a certain kind of habitual element to it. So people are very familiar with the way that gas boilers work, especially the kind of, if you look at the older proportion of society, there's uncertainties that come in when you bring in new technologies, and they're very comfortable with the way that those things work in their homes. I think we're getting to a point where you know, the comparisons with how things were before are kind of improving. So prior to mains gas in homes, that comparison between then and how they use now is kind of phasing out, and we kind of need a new narrative in terms of moving on to the next step, and why it's kind of relevant for today. And I think we need to think differently. When I hear people talk about payback, it is a really important aspect of it in terms of the investment. But there's other aspects to it. So I've recently heard, and I'm quoting here, so don't kind of take this as kind of fact, but double glazing has something like a 90-year payback in terms of the energy savings you make from it. But the thing that is attractive about double glazing is, you know, it improves the aesthetic of your house. It reduces other things like, you know, sound pollution, noise pollution. It makes your home more kind of comfortable. And we need to think about that kind of aspect of the kind of these investments. It shouldn't just all be about, like, you know, payback time. There are kind of softer kind of benefits from these technologies.
Yeah, so I think that's very important to remember, that you're not putting technology into your home just to make it more efficient or less carbon intensive. You are also doing it to improve your life, so and make it a more amenable home. Speaking of which, Chris, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, so I think I mean, you know, obviously our experiences are more clear with you know, social housing, but I think that a lot of it will translate across. What's interesting about social housing is, I mean, there is a challenge, you know, when you mention skills shortages, or, you know, trying to upskill people to maintain this equipment, but that, you know, we see that as a challenge for us to make that the installation aspect of it as simple as possible. And I think when you, as previously mentioned, that the tech is kind of here and it's sort of ready. You know, one aspect of that are things like the ability for it to be very simply, you know, installed and maintained. And a lot of the sensors that we install have 10-year battery lives, for example, so that, you know, without having to go back to that property for 10 years, you know, you're able to get the benefits from it. With the business case, and, you know, being able to sort of get these technologies across the market. Obviously, social housing is not the majority of housing, but I think it represents about 20%. So it's a solid 5 million homes, of which many obviously would be retrofit. And the interesting thing about social housing is that you're basically able to solve the landlord. They do care about business case, so return on investment. They also have an agenda to, an energy efficiency agenda and a resident health and well-being agenda, and a number of different areas. So it's almost easier to get that business case with them. And for some of these technologies, we've been able to show a very strong business case, and for that reason, we're seeing a lot of scale. I think that, so in a funny kind of way, all the kind of smart home technology that's fun to play with, or electric curtains and things like this, or different changing light bulb colored light bulbs, starts at that sort of people with lots of money that just want to play around with some tech. And what's really interesting is we're seeing the most cutting edge innovations in this particular area in terms of the interplay between energy efficiency, data, and how that affects air quality, and all these different things is really happening in social housing. You can't buy consumer devices yet that offer the same sort of insight that we do, and a couple of others do. All those companies are doing that for social housing. I think when it goes to consumers, and I think it will, because I don't think the majority of people are going to pick up smart home technology until it's got more of a use case than just being something that they like playing with, or it's kind of novel. And I think there has to be a play of different things. I think a saving is one aspect of that, but I think when people realise the health implications of living in a cold home, or living in a home with poor air quality because you've just got loads of energy efficiency stuff in, and now it's super airtight, and your indoor air quality is awful, and indoor air quality is often worse than outdoor air quality, and air quality is one of the biggest costs on the NHS, and biggest aspects that ruins your health. So when people are more aware of that, and they have the data and they see that and what the implications are, I think that there's going to be quite a broad adoption of this technology, and probably at some point in the future I'd imagine it'd be legislated in the same way that smoke alarms weren't always legislated. I think when lives are saved, or they see health cases improving with these people with these technologies, then that's the kind of the route I imagine it will take long term.
So this is anecdote rather than analysis, but I used to work in the smart metering program in government, and a story from a government minister in the early days of smart metering, when we were still writing business cases for it, was that this is smart metering, and the data from that was not all about reducing energy consumption. And one of the stories that we heard was that there was and it was in social housing, and there was an instance of black spot mold due to poor air quality. And one of the reasons was people were not using their extractor fans because they make quite a lot of noise. And if something makes a lot of noise, you think it must use a lot of energy. And actually, by visualizing in near real time the electricity consumption of an extractor fan, people realized that, it actually doesn't use very much energy, and we can run that. And indoor air quality in that social housing development improved. I don't have figures for that, but that's the...
We've seen similar things actually to that. On the black spot mold thing, we actually had a pilot recently where one of the residents had really good data for our home. It's energy efficient. It's just saving energy well and things like that. Air quality looked pretty good, and suddenly there was black mold across one of the walls, and normally it'd be considered the tenants. 90% of the time it is tenant kind of living conditions, but in this case the data said that the living conditions are great. So then that prompted further inspection from the landlord, and they found that there was there was a leaky guttering from a storm that basically had leaked water into the wall, causing this really unhealthy problem that without data you might have just thought it's a tenant issue, and that there would have just been a backwards and forwards for a long time. Then you'd be getting taken to court under the Fitness for Human habitation, and there's, it really kind of opens your eyes with these unique cases. And I think another one, the EPC one as well, was there was I was on the same project actually. One home was thermally much worse. You know, it was mid-range EPC rating, but it was really thermally inefficient. It was like losing heat, you know, really badly. But at the same time, the ventilation metrics were really good, which suggested that it's probably just quite a drafty home. And again, you know, it didn't need a super clever new type of heat pump or anything like that. It just took someone to go around and spend, you know, 50 quid fixing a sort of drafty door. And you potentially taking someone out of fuel poverty, saving them loads of money. But again, that person wouldn't have known. They don't know how much, like, you know, they're spending money on heating. They don't really know what it should be. They didn't. It's just been unknown without that data. So
So I want to come back to this question about the sort of point of contact and how these decisions are made in a moment. But first, there is a question in the chat, and I did want to come on to this at some point. So now feels like a good time. We've been asked for case studies or examples of a perfect green or lean or smart home, and what do they look like? Now, I saw some things in the paper just perhaps a few months ago of new builds. We're here partly to talk about retrofit, but Rebecca and Simon, I imagine in your travels, you have come across someone or other, maybe not claiming to be producing perfect homes, but do we have an idea of what a perfect home might look like, and is that important?
I'll hand over to Simon first, give him a chance.
Sorry. It's an interesting question because actually, you know, everyone's view of a perfect home and what suits them will be different. Every individual, you know, and this is the whole piece with retrofit, isn't it? That, you know, when we're talking about retrofit, every home is different. So as an example, a group of builders that we know decided that they would only build net zero property. So they've been developing for about the last three and a bit years, homes that are net zero. Yeah. Well, they're not quite exactly net zero because I think one of them had a £45 energy cost for a whole year. So, but they were slightly more expensive to build. They have high fabric sort of really standards that have been put in. They are using low carbon technologies. They are using sort of renewable sources. I think they've gone now actually to solar roofs, because they are now available. So that, you know, but that there's probably a premium still to pay for somebody to build a property like that. And I think Rebecca was so right in earlier saying, you know, if you really want to get the house I live in to net zero, am I going to spend best part of £75,000 probably doing that? That's a big ask. But we picked the point up you made earlier as well, Jeremy, which is about we actually need to create a journey for all this property. So yeah, most people will want to look at a property and work out how they can get to that perfect place. A lot won't be able to afford it in one stage. So what we should have is the ability to recognize that a property starts a journey and has a finish point. And at any one of those points in that journey, you can look at some sort of map and say, or some plan that says this is where we've got to within that. So this is all about technology and data, because that's all about storing that. That's about bringing that to life. So I think, yeah, you know, there's a huge amount we can do, but there's an awful lot of education as well required for consumers. And consumers need to understand, because I don't think consumers truly understand what net zero is. I don't think they truly understand, you know, retrofit. You know, I talked to a group of people about retrofit and they started talking about bathrooms and kitchens. You know, it's that concept of what comes into play.
Is it right if I come back to Simon on that very quickly, because it's something I'm quite interested about personally as well. I'm currently going through a house renovation, and it's difficult. There are different types of people who take on, again, I'm talking about owner occupiers rather than social housing or new build. But I think what's missing is, in other markets, you would clearly segment the type of consumers and the decisions that they make and how they approach problems. What I think is missing at the moment is a really good understanding for how people would different segments in this is owner occupier again, in that market for how they approach retrofit or renovation decision makings, because you've got the kind of person who will just project plan themselves, DIY to their heart's content, and get some contractors in for specific issues. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, and I'm generalizing, but people who want people to come in and give them a solution. And I think we're missing that, and maybe there is this piece of research already, and Simon, you might be aware of it, but that really good, clear understanding of the type of people in that retrofit space, and which will then help the solution providers, and we're talking about solution providers to help people get to that, to meet the needs of each of those customer segments and specialize and give them that experience that they need.
So some interesting work we've been doing with the GFI, you know, in the Coalition for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. Some of the projects have been looking at exactly that point, which is, you know, even across the board, when we treat a property, regardless of tenure, there should be some way to look at that property and take it through that journey. So we started looking in about 12 months ago and said, well, actually, if I want to treat a property for energy efficiency, to bring technology into that property, how do I do that? And then, you know, you think, great, dare I say, internet searches, best place to go, yeah, we'll get everything. Within about 15 minutes, you've got so bored and so confused by so much information that actually you just give up. Whereas we need something, and I think this is where the GFI is working with lots of organizations to create this pathway for a homeowner, a consumer to go through to do exactly what Rebecca's saying, which is, actually, I need to understand what a heat pump is, what insulation is, you know, the technology of smart homes. So, you know, if I'm savvy in technology, I want to run something on my phone. But before I jump into the whole concept of it, I want an understanding. And once I get that understanding, I want then to apply that to my house and look at what I can do. So you can go through and it's a bit like pulling data back, putting data in, creating this image of a property, being able to understand it, look at the plan, understand how you can afford it, and build this holistic view of what you can do. And at the moment, that is virtually impossible to do, you know, without employing multiple people to do multiple things, and you end up with multiple answers. So we've got to somehow bring some form of technology into play at the front end that allows us a really consumer-friendly, engaging process, and probably a business-friendly process as well, to go through that first stage to get to the point where we've got the plan. I think that's probably my thinking on that one. So,
Simon, that's fantastic. And there's a question in the chat which I think you have anticipated and largely answered. Now feels like an excellent time, if you'll excuse me, to plug a recent BEAMA publication called Future Ready Homes, where we set out 12 things that homes need to do for net zero strategies to be achievable. So these are not 12 things that you do and once you've done them, your house is carbon neutral. It's 12 practical actions that you can do now so that you can be at the center of government strategies for heat decarbonisation, electrification, and a home energy efficiency pathway for what we call a practical no regret pathway to net zero. So the key was not in this paper that we wrote, and I'll put it in the chat. It's not so much how can you make your home carbon neutral now, it's how can you make it ready for the future so it can connect to and benefit from the new energy infrastructure. Very interesting, Simon, what you were talking earlier about skills. I had some renovation on my home a few years ago, 2 years ago, and I really thought hard about a heat pump. And the builders I was using went, oh no, mate, you don't want to go there. And basically, they had no idea how to connect or deal with or use a heat pump. One of the guys was a plumber, and it's very difficult, I think, for people working in the trade to, as you were saying before, have on site technicians who can work with all of the complex uses and functions of smart homes. Rebecca, I think there was something you wanted to come back on, but before I do, I just wanted to name check also There's a Smart Energy GB paper recently published on assisted living and the health and social care, how smart metering and that data can improve health and social care outcomes in the home. This is something that BEAMA thinks about a lot as well. So yes, Rebecca, if you wanted to carry on, I interrupted your flow, but you were talking about the journey. Perhaps you could touch on business models or market models that, as you say, how do we sustain the pace?
Afterwards, yes, well, Simon's spoken a little bit about the work, and he's engaged a lot with the Green Finance Institute as well. But I suppose and we've also spoken quite a lot about the raft of grant measures that have been put in place already. But I suppose going forward, we need not necessarily to rely on grant mechanisms into the future. And this is not a journey that's just going to be 2020s, it's going to be 2030s and so on. And although it helps promote investment in the green economy, as we've seen in small-scale renewables like rooftop solar, that's likely to come away as the market becomes more sustainable in the future. And how is it going to become more sustainable? Because the value needs to be reflected to people, whether that's financially in the value of the properties. So social housing, they make the investments because it's reflected in the value of the properties, and individuals do that as well. And also to pick up on what Sam and Chris were talking about, is valuable in other ways: the comfort, the security, the improved experience of the home. And I suppose when I was saying earlier about that service design, it's how you communicate those benefits to people, that they're comfortable, they believe, they trust, they're confident in what's being done for individual measures, but also you need to take other large organisations like social housing or new build also on that journey to make sure that they trust in what's being spoken about, and that people want it to take it forward as well. I don't know if that answers the question mainly, but I think there's two parts to it, which is one, we need financial instruments and value to be reflected in terms of finance in these assets we're talking about, which are homes. And then secondly, people to value it enough to want to make a transition and to change. And maybe this is one for Chris, is are people fully aware of air quality in their homes and comfort, and how much it can change? Because my hypothesis is British people don't know, and they put a jumper on and they just deal with it, and don't know whether people really know about it that well.
No, I mean, yeah, I think a lot of the research around the impact of poor indoor air quality has been more. There's been a lot of it more recently over the last few years, and this has actually led legislation, for example, in Scotland to require carbon dioxide monitoring in new builds, because CO2 is used as a proxy for indoor air quality, and in new builds they're so airtight and energy efficient that actually there's a secondary problem now where you have really poor indoor air quality, and it's affecting people's health and also the health of the property. So you're more likely to get molds and things like this if you have a very airtight property. So in solving one problem, we've created another one, which is potentially very significant to the individuals. And just looking at just to take CO2 even by itself as a measure, we've seen studies that show that above 1,000 parts per million CO2, you score, if you're in that environment for a couple of hours, you score 50% less on cognitive tests than you would have done prior to that. And 1,000 parts per million CO2, we see it's absolutely almost standard. People are in that environment, so it's really quite shocking. Higher than that, when you're moving more towards 4,000 above, for sustained periods, you start having problems with organs and things like this. And we see that in a not insignificant number of properties, particularly over lockdown, when more people have been at home, and particularly when it gets cold and no one's having windows open, or everyone's keeping doors shut. Particularly with overcrowded houses, so people that are potentially in poverty would suffer from this more. And a lot of this research and knowledge is becoming more clear. And I have no idea about any of this. I didn't, before starting HomeLINK, I didn't really know much about mold or the implications of that or anything. It's only doing the research as part of this that you can't suddenly see there's this huge thing that people might not be talking about that much now. But you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be, especially as more homes become more and more airtight. So it's just a dual thing to consider, because you don't want to be going back undoing the insulation that you've done, because actually it's just not breathable, and it's force you to live in an extremely unhealthy environment that the human body's not evolved to live in.
So be careful of the unintended consequences, basically.
Yeah.
There's an excellent question in the chat, and this is £104 billion is the cost of retrofitting all the UK's social homes. And of course, that number could be different if we're talking about different levels of retrofitting. And I've been asked to ask the panel's view on that level of spend and whether it's achievable. Before I do, just a tiny little anecdote. You may be able to tell, I don't know, but from my accent, I am Australian. And one of the things the Australian government did in its wisdom after the 2007-8 credit crunch, they called it the global financial crisis, was to identify specific areas of public spending that would boost the economy, and basically, rather than have austerity measures, try to bring the Australian economy out of recession. And one of the most efficient ways of spending the money that they identified was to retrofit and update school buildings. That they looked at schools and they went, right, we're going to spend lots of money making these buildings better, safer, cleaner, etc. So just with that as a context, how do people on the panel feel about £100 billion on retrofitting all of the UK's social homes? Chris, I'm sure you would love that. So maybe this is a question immediately for Rebecca and Simon, and Sam, you'll have a view on the approaches to that as well.
I was going to ask what the source for the 104 billion is, but I can't imagine it. Seems reasonable for the amount of work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
What are the views that level of spend?
It seems a bit low. If you.
Yeah. Well, just to quote, I'm not sure if the people who are watching are familiar with the Remorbin project, which was in Nottingham City, but they spent £50,000 on a home, and they still didn't manage to get to net zero in terms of the amount of energy that was required, and there's a lot of planning that went to that. So yeah, even that estimation might be too low if we're really ultimately the goal is net zero rather than just EPCC. Yeah. Is it achievable? I'm afraid I'm not a macro economist, so I can't necessarily make that comment. But if we carry on waiting years, then in terms of meeting that ultimate goal, probably not. So it's trying to put some of those investments into place now rather than making them waiting until 2025, 2030, and the latter end of the decade to start making action. And I think there's a lot of pilots that have happened in terms of looking at retrofit. So Remorbin is one I'm very familiar with, which is why I mention it. That's one pilot where they've looked at this. So there's been a lot of activity in terms of pilots, but not necessarily in terms of putting mass retrofit programs in place. Yeah. And it's happening now, but I suppose the issue is trying to unlock when business plans have been made in social housing in particular for 2-3 years ahead, and they've got a long-term view on making these investments. They've got to change course now or in the next couple of years to start doing these kind of programs immediately. And I suppose when I was talking about aligning incentives at the start, it's how do we encourage these things need to happen, they need to be legislated to happen, but then people need to, in businesses and in social housing, need to be able to make those decisions imminently to put those programs in place within the next 5 years. It's a long timescale. It's not a decision of deciding that they're going to do a retrofit program and then doing it in the next 2 months. And the supply chain, I haven't even talked about. Simon's probably got a good view on this as well. It's like, if we're doing that level of investment, even if you start next year, do we have the right people in place as well as the money?
So in the 30 seconds left to us, I'm just going to take things away from macroeconomics for a moment. And clearly, Simon, there is an importance of validating your retrofit activity to make sure that you're delivering value back to the consumer. You've got 30 seconds left before I thank everyone for coming. Can you talk just a little bit about how TrustMark is dealing with that at the moment and making sure that these grants are value for money?
The value for money comes from having businesses that have probably come through a compliance and audit style process. They can provide choice, they can provide comfort, they can provide actually quality of install. And we've got to now promote that ability to deliver quality, whatever. And I know it may mean we have to wait slightly longer. You know, I use the term, we've almost become a prime society, haven't we? Which means we want everything today. We can't wait a little bit of time for it. So, but we need to invest, and we need to invest not just in looking at how we really optimize retrofit, but we have education, we have the whole piece to bring people through it on a journey. And we need to stop thinking about some of just the traditional skills and think about new skills.
Yeah. On that inspiring and challenging note, I could talk for another hour about skills, frankly, and I would like to at some other point. I just want to thank you all very much, Simon Ayers, Sam Collier, Rebecca Lane, and Chris Jones. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you to those in the audience who joined us. Thank you to Elemental for sponsoring this, or for hosting this this panel discussion. There's a lot to think about. Please do keep in touch, and back to you, Ben. But thanks again, everyone, for time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.